Welcome, everyone. How are you doing today? So nice to see you. Mariana here at Mexico Relocation Guide. I'm trying to make us go live on Instagram. So give me 1 second and we're going to get started here shortly. All right. Looks like we're on Instagram. Thank you all so much for being here tonight. Happy Friday. If you're watching this replay on another day, we're doing this on Friday, November 8th. I'm so excited to share with you guys your questions, right? Answer your questions about moving to Mexico. I know that, moving to Mexico is certainly not as straightforward, right, as we would love it to be, but we try to make it as simple for you by sharing not only these live streams, but also the variety of blog posts that we write, all the content that we make, and then, of course, by answering your questions through emails or comments and through these live streams. So if you're new around here, my name is Mariana, and this is Mexico Relocation Guide, where we teach you how to move to Mexico the right way. And we're going to get started here in a minute. I'm going to give you guys a chance to join us. If you're joining us for the very, very first time, if this is your very first Mexico Relocation Guide live stream, let me know in the comments. I would love for you to start asking your questions. So please go ahead and start posting in the comments because we're going to have an hour today to cover your questions. I want to get started with something a little bit different than we normally do, just because I felt like in the mood to share a quote. And I read this today, and I thought it was really great. So all our dreams can come true if we have the courage to pursue them. And that is from Walt Disney. So let that sink in. Can your dreams come true? Yes, it can, if you have the courage to pursue them. So exciting. I see a lot of first timers here. That's awesome. Well, welcome. I promise that we will not waste your time. This is going to be packed of great information. Thank you so much for being here, Kevin. Thank you, Michael, for being here. Bentley and Jackson. Oh, I love it. Are those your dogs? That's adorable. My dog is sleeping behind me, so you may hear some snoring from time to time. I feel really bad about kicking her out of my room whenever I do these live streams because she's glued to me. So every now and then you might hear me like snap my fingers, and it's because I'm trying to tell her to quiet down. Pamela, thank you so much for being here. Welcome. Very, very excited. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing your questions, and I will start getting to them soon. So a couple of things that I want to mention first before we get started into your questions, I'm going to give you guys a chance to start posting them, is you may have joined a live stream that I did a few days ago with an immigration facilitator. And we shared a lot of really good information. So if you want to go check that out after today, highly encourage you to do so. But I also want to tell you that I want to clarify some things because at the end of that live stream, I kind of just evaluated and thought maybe some people might not really be super clear on the residency visa process. So there are multiple ways for you to obtain residency in Mexico. And I mentioned residency because many of you are probably watching this channel because you're interested in moving to Mexico legally. So there are 2 steps for most people to do your residency visa. And one of the most common ones is through economic solvency. And that is, of course, proving to Mexico that you have the means to not only live in Mexico, but to thrive, right? That you're not going to be like a social burden or a burden on the economy. There's another type of residency visa that is called the regularization program, the RNE, Registro Nacional de Extranjeros. That's what it translates to. And that is a game changer, which is still available. The year of the end, the end of the year is coming up in a couple of weeks. And if you haven't looked into this regularization program, I highly encourage you to consider it because it's a game changer for those who do not qualify for a traditional Mexican residency via economic solvency. The requirements for the RNE are that you must have visited Mexico at least once before 2022. Some states are very stringent on only between 2015 and 2022. You must have had at least one visit between those years. And then I've heard of other cities where as long as INM can find, INM is immigration in Mexico, as long as INM can find you in their system, then, you're fine, as long as you've had a visit before. You would need to come to Mexico as a tourist. And when you come to Mexico, depending on whether you drive in or you fly in, you're given an FMM if you are from one of the many countries that we give FMMs to. And that's usually the United States, Canada, Japan, all of Europe, basically, Singapore, Panama, the UK. So basically, most of you that are watching on here, right? You would get an FMM when you go through an airport. Most airports will give you an automatic 180 days if you have a passport from one of those countries. If you are driving to Mexico, so very important, if you are driving to Mexico, it is your responsibility to stop at immigration and register your entrance to Mexico. If you did not do that, like let's say, you live on the border with Tijuana, maybe you live near Southern California and you came through Tijuana and then you passed on over to, Baja Sur, but you never stop at immigration. Well, there's no way for immigration to know that you were in the country. I know it's weird, but you can actually drive in without actually ever registering your entry. So it's your responsibility to stop at immigration, register that entry, because otherwise their INM would not have you in their system. So you would need to, they would not have you in their system before 2022. So as long as you stopped at immigration when you drove in sometime before 2022, between 2015 and 2022, then they should probably have you in their system. Assuming that you are in the immigration system, you would also need to come to Mexico now. And if you are flying in, you would normally get 180 days. If you are driving in, some people get 7 days. Some people have gotten 180 days. I recommend that if you are trying to come to Mexico for the sole purpose of trying to secure your residency visa under this R&E program, that you try a land border first, because land borders are more likely to be able to give you a 7-day FMM, particularly the land border in Tijuana, as long as you are telling them that you are coming on a short term. So you have to be very, very clear with the immigration agent that you would like a 7-day FMM. Otherwise, they might give you 180 days. And why do I mention this? Because when you come as a tourist to apply for this R&E program, you must wait for your current FMM to expire before you can qualify. So if you get 180 days as an FMM, you cannot apply for this program until those 180 days are done. And you can't leave Mexico and then come back in 180 days because then you would get another FMM and then, the time starts again. So if you're trying to take advantage of this program, which, by the way, the biggest game changer is that there are no economic solvency requirements, meaning the only thing that you need to do is prove that you were here before and that you have overstayed your FMM permit, meaning like your tourist visa, sort of say. So they do a study. They will find you in their system, and by they I mean immigration. They will do a study. They will determine if you qualify. They will charge you a fine. The fine varies depending on which city in Mexico you are going to be applying for this R&E program. And it can go anywhere from 2,000 pesos, which is about $100, up to 10,000 pesos, which is $500 at today's exchange rate. So you're looking at a fine of about $200 to $500, right? Depending on the city that you apply in. Then you also have to pay for the 4 years of temporary residency up front. And that does not include any immigration facilitator fee. So you're looking at around $1,000 a person to be able to apply for this R&E program, which is, it's well worth it. You get 4 years up front of a temporary residency. You don't have to live in Mexico. And the biggest thing is that you don't need to be financially solvent to apply. But there is a process. It's not just like you show up, you get your FMM, you wait 7 days, you go to immigration, and then you're just granted this residency. There is a process. And for that reason, I do recommend that you hire an immigration facilitator that is well-versed with the regularization program, because not everybody is well versed in that program, and you need to make sure that you work with somebody who knows what immigration is going to look for and ensure that you have the highest chance of success. Once you get your residency card, you can leave Mexico. Usually that is done in, a couple of days. It can take up to 2 weeks, just depending on the immigration office, whether they are backed up. We're coming up here on holidays, important holidays in Mexico, and Mexican bureaucracy, Mexican offices, government offices love to take 4-day weekends. So if a holiday is coming up on a Thursday, you can guarantee that Thursday all the way through Monday, it'll be closed. And then for Christmas, they usually close 2 weeks until usually around the 20th of December, all the way through until after New Year's. So very important, if you're not financially solvent and you don't qualify for residency, the traditional route, look into the R&E program. There is talk that they are not going to extend this in next year. There has been talk about this for years. The program has been around since 2020. I don't think that they're not going to extend it. I think they're going to extend it because it's such a money generating program for Mexico. I mean, for starters, the fees that they charge for the fine, and then you pay for the 4 years up front. So anyway, I don't think they're going to do away with it, but we never know. So if you want to take advantage of it, I highly recommend you hire a facilitator to help you. A facilitator will charge you anywhere from 4,000 to, I've heard also facilitators charging up to 20,000 pesos, right? It just depends on the facilitator, how busy they are, how reputable they are, how much service they are offering you, how many documents they might be translating for you, all those things. Once you get your card, you can then petition family. So you can petition a spouse, you can petition children that are under 18 and not married. If they are over 18, there are specific cases where you might be able to petition them, specifically if they depend on you. So like if they're still in college or if they have a medical disability, other things that you can prove that they depend on you. There is more paperwork involved in that, though, than just like applying for your spouse or your underage child. You can also petition parents and siblings. So there's many family members that you can petition. So anyway, that is for the regularization program. For the economic solvency requirements, so for those of you who don't want to come to Mexico as a tourist, wait out 180 days, or you don't really know if you can drive across the border and wait those 7 days, there is, of course, the other way of getting residency, which is through economic solvency. The current requirements for November 2024 vary a lot across the different consulates. Because if you're new around here, Mexico's peso, so the currency in Mexico, has fluctuated so much against the US dollar or the Canadian dollar. So basically, sometimes the dollar or the peso is at 17 pesos to $1 US. Sometimes, like today, it's close to 20. It's at 1980 something. The other day was almost at 21 pesos to $1 US. So they use a formula that calculates the current exchange rate. And some of them set their economic solvency requirements at the beginning of the year. So whatever the exchange rate was in January, that's usually what they set them at. And then some of them fluctuate as the year goes by. So it really depends on which consulate you're going to be applying in. And again, we have a variety of immigration facilitators across Mexico that can help you set up your initial consulate appointment, help you make sure that you know what that specific consulate requires, what are the requirements, make sure that you qualify. And then, of course, the bulk of what they do is on the Mexican side. So they accompany you to the immigration offices. They help you make sure that you fill out the correct paperwork for the INM offices. They will help translate any documents. Documents in Mexico for government purposes need to be translated by an official translator in that state. And that's called basically a perito traductor. And they are appointed by court. So like, it's not just like you can go to, your friend who also happens to be a translator and help you translate these documents. They have to be certified in that state where you are applying. So yeah, and then they will help you make sure that you pay the correct fees. And if the INM agent has any questions, they will help make sure that, you know, the process goes as smoothly as possible. They will also help ensure that you have an appointment with that INM office, because all those appointments are now done online. And that online system is finicky because it's brand new. It just started in September and they're still working out some kinks. So an immigration facilitator is worth their weight in gold. And again, they charge anywhere from 4,000 pesos, which is about 200 bucks a person, all the way up to about 20,000 pesos, which is about $1,000 a person. Just depends on the individual. All right, let's get into your questions. Now that I've covered, just wanted to clarify those things. Oh, for economic solvency, the current requirements are anywhere around 3,800 US dollars, right? Or up to 4,500 US dollars, depending on which consulate you're going to be applying at for temporary residency based on income. So meaning that you work, you have employment, you are able to prove that you have bank statements showing that you have, you know, regular deposits. And I'm pulling up some notes here so I can make sure I give you guys my ranges. But yeah, so for monthly income requirement, meaning anything from a job or anything showing bank statements for the last 6 months, like a checking account, you need to prove anywhere between 3,800 US dollars a month. So you need to show that you have this net every month for the past 6 months. And it varies between every consulate. This, you can also apply based on savings. So if you have investments, you have savings, like if you have brokerage accounts, 401k, those kinds of investments, you can also apply based on that if you don't have a typical monthly income. And for that, you need to prove anywhere between 62,000 up to 70,000 US dollars as a minimum balance, that you have held that balance for the past 12 months. So you don't need to make like $62,000 every month, but you do need to show that you have held at least 62,000 and up to 70,000, depending on which consulate you're going to be applying at, for the past 12 months. Now, these things can change from today to tomorrow. It depends on the consulate because they're the ones that set the requirements. We try to get this information for you guys, and then we post it obviously on our blog post. But I will say that it is ultimately up to the consulate what their requirements are for the day. So it's very important that when you set up an appointment with a consulate, that you get the actual requirements, because you might be watching this replay, you know, 6 months from now, and the requirements change every year. So it's very important for you to actually consult with the consulate first to ensure that you have the most up-to-date information. We try to give you the most up-to-date information. We do a very good job of it, I think. But, you know, the consulates can give you sometimes different information than what we have. And then the other thing is you don't have to live in Mexico. So a lot of you are making your plans for, you know, 2, 3, 5, 7 years from now. Or maybe just as a plan B. You're not really sure when, but you just want it as a plan B. Mexico doesn't require you to live in Mexico for you to remain a resident. If you become a temporary resident through economic solvency, you will have to come back to Mexico after year 1 to renew your residency. And you can renew it for 3 additional years. After you're done renewing, you can leave Mexico and then come back. After 4 years as a temporary resident, you can then apply to become a permanent resident without having to prove economic solvency. That process is done in Mexico. So you will have to travel again to Mexico if you're not living here. And you will, of course, have to go through a process which is more paperwork, paying more fees, and then you become a permanent resident. But once you become a permanent resident and you get that permanent residency card, that is indefinite. You no longer have to you don't have to become a citizen. You can if you wish to, but you don't have to. So if you are thinking about, you know, further down the line, I would say start the process now. Temporary and permanent residents have about the same benefits. The exceptions are that temporary residents are able to drive a foreign plated car to Mexico for the duration of their residency card. So if you are a year 1 temporary resident, you will only be able to drive your car for 1 year. Then you can extend your permit to drive that foreign plated vehicle for the duration of your card. So if you renew for 3 years, then you can extend your permit. Permanent residents are not allowed to drive foreign plated vehicles. So if you're thinking about moving from Canada or the United States and you're thinking of driving to Mexico with your car, you will not be able to drive it with plates from the United States unless you live in the free zone, which the free zone, or la zona libre, is a section that is basically used for trade, right? And there's concessions that the United States and Mexico have done where they allow trade with, very little to no taxes. And in that free zone, that is all of the Baja Peninsula, parts of Sonora, Chihuahua, Tamaulipas, and all of Quintana Roo, because Quintana Roo is next to Belize. But in order for you to get to Quintana Roo, you would have to drive through the entire country of Mexico. And it would be very hard for you to get through the entire country and not get stopped, right? Because if you get stopped and your paperwork is not in order, they can impound your car. So don't risk it. The other way to do it, if you love your car and you really want to import it, you can nationalize it. The cost of that depends on the age of the vehicle, the type of vehicle, and whether or not it is made in one of the countries that Mexico allows for cars to be imported. Not all cars can be imported. And the prices for that, I've seen customers pay from $2,000 up to $8,000, depending on the car. So there are ways for you to bring your foreign plated car if you are a permanent resident and you don't plan on living in the free zone. All right, let's get to your questions. Thank you, Dr. Z. Thanks for being here. We are actually releasing a video on the Rosarito area very soon, so please stay tuned on this YouTube channel. If you're not part of our newsletter yet, sign up, because that's how you'll know when I post it. MexicoRelocationGuide.com/newsletter. The pros and cons of Rosarito. I mean, I will be very honest. I'm not from Rosarito. I don't live in Rosarito. But, I think this video will share a lot of that really good information. I think one of the pros is that, you have obviously the beach, you're very close to the United States. You are obviously, the proximity to the United States is one of the huge benefits of living in that whole area. Rosarito, Ensenada, Valle de Guadalupe, Tijuana, even some people like living in Tijuana. Although personally, for my taste, it's a little bit too dangerous. We don't really recommend it, but hey, if you have family there and you have a house, and some people do like it, and that's obviously the closest to the United States you'll ever get. But that is some of the pros. Some of the cons are they do sometimes have water issues. It depends on which neighborhood you're going to be living in. The weather can be a little bit arid during some of the winter months. Some of the things that people have shared with me about cons of Rosarito. Or also the ocean can sometimes be not the cleanest. So there are some environmental things that have popped up about the ocean. But that video will answer a lot of questions, and it'll also give you a visual of what Rosarito is like. And a lot of people really like it because, they can just go on over to the United States, get all their medical services done, and then, in a couple of hours be back home. They can do shopping up north and then just in a couple of hours be back home, or vice versa. I have also customers who work in the United States and then live in Rosarito. So there's a little bit of both. If anybody in the comments lives in Rosarito and wants to chime in, by all means. Joan, thank you so much for being here. I'm going to be in La Paz November 18th, looking to buy a house. I'm very excited, coming from Portland, Oregon. Awesome. We have some excellent realtors that we recommend in La Paz, in Los Cabos, and they also offer rentals. So one of the things that we do recommend for anybody thinking about moving to Mexico is that you rent first, at least for 6 months to a year, if you have never lived in that area before. I would say even if you have lived in the area, as depending on how long ago that was, and if you're not really sure where you want to buy a home, I would say even then I would rent first, at least for 6 months, just to be able to get acquainted with your surroundings. Make sure that you like living in the area, that you're comfortable with the weather, with the infrastructure, with the people, with the neighborhoods that you like what you see, right? It's very easy to buy a house in Mexico. It's not so easy to sell, especially depending on the price and the market. But I would say if you're looking to buy and you've never been in La Paz before, one, I would recommend doing a relocation tour very, very, very first to get acquainted with the neighborhoods, renting at least for 6 months, maybe a year, maybe more. Maybe some people never actually buy. And then once you're actually acquainted with the area and you really know that La Paz is by far your place, then look into buying. And we have some excellent recommendations on realtors for both rentals and purchases, not only in La Paz, all across Mexico. So yeah, thanks for being here. Great question, Kevin. He's going to be retiring in 4 months. What is a good time to start the process? First timer. Thanks so much for being here. As soon as possible, like yesterday. I think that if you're going to be retiring soon and you're working right now, meaning you have like some form of employment income, I would apply for residency before you retire. Unless your retirement income far surpasses the income requirements for a permanent residency visa in Mexico. And the permanent residency requirements are higher than the temporary residency requirements. However, I don't mention it a lot because a lot of consulates do not give people permanent residency if they are not, one, if they're not retired, you're most likely not going to get permanent residency. And two, if you're not over 60. So let's say you retire early, most likely they'll give you temporary residency. Don't worry, you can get a permanent residency after 4 years of being a temporary resident. But I would say if you're going to retire soon, apply for it sooner, because that way you can show the consulate that you have some income coming in, that you are financially solvent through employment, unless you have more than the requirements are for permanent residency, or you have a lot of money in the bank, a lot of money in savings and investments, that it would be undeniable to show that you are more than economically solvent for either a temporary or permanent residency. So I would say apply as soon as possible. And then once you are done with the consulate appointment, if you get approved, you get a stamp on your passport. It's basically a visa, and it shows that you have 180 days to travel to Mexico and exchange that for a residency card. That process is called canje. We have a ton of information on our website about canje. Go to our blog post and type in CANJE. For canje, once you actually cross into Mexico, you will then get 30 days to finish the process. So again, once you are done at the consulate and you get pre-approval, you are given 180 days as on your passport, on your visa stamp, to travel to Mexico. But once you enter Mexico, you are now under a 30-day window to finish the process at the immigration office in the city where you plan to live. If you don't know where you're going to be living yet, it's okay, no big deal. You can go to any immigration office that you want, but some of them will require you to show local proof of address, and usually that is an electricity bill. And if you don't have a facilitator, it'll be really hard for you to get an electricity bill, unless maybe your Airbnb host is really nice and just lets you borrow theirs, or you might have friends and family in town that let you borrow theirs. But usually if you are not living in the area, you don't have a lease, you don't have anything in your name, the only way to show it is by borrowing somebody's electricity bill or some other bill that immigration accepts. And the facilitators that we recommend across Mexico usually help our customers with that by lending them the various bills or utility bills that immigration accepts to satisfy those requirements. But it's very important that once you actually move and you have a different address, that you make those changes with immigration, because it's very, very rare, but they can do house checks. And if they determine that you don't live in the same address that you gave when you did your whole exchange, they can fine you. And the fine is anywhere between $100 to about $500. It does depend on obviously the immigration office. But yeah, you don't want to get fined. You don't want to deal with that. So just very important that if you are not living in the area, again, it's very rare that they do a house check. I don't want to scare anybody into thinking like, oh, well, maybe I shouldn't start because I don't plan on living in Mexico for another couple of years. It's very rare. And if you're working with an immigration facilitator, they are borrowing these addresses. And obviously, you know, if they did do a check, you'd be okay because a person could, you know, vouch for you and say, yeah, they live here. But yeah, just like a little tidbit of information that isn't really published anywhere and you should know. Lumbar. To apply for permanent residency, are you allowed to go to any consulate or are you required to go to the one for your state of residence? It depends on the consulate. Some of them do allow out-of-state applicants or even out-of-country applicants as long as you have permission to be in the United States. And some of them do not. Some of them are very, very, very locked in. Like, we only take people that live in our municipality. For example, like basically all of California is like that. They are notorious for asking people for proof of address. Sometimes they ask you for a copy of your driver's license before they'll make an appointment for you. Sometimes they'll ask for, you know, just tax records showing that, like property tax records showing that you actually live in the area. I've heard all kinds of things from people. But California is kind of hard to work with. The consulates that we recommend that we have found are the most flexible and easiest to work with are the ones in Boston, Boise, the one in Newark, New Jersey, Orlando, Raleigh. It's kind of a wild card. Sometimes they're great, sometimes they're not great. But Raleigh, I would add in that mix because, you know, you might be really lucky and they might be great. DC, Las Vegas, San Antonio, surprisingly, has become a little bit more lenient. Phoenix, Arizona, Yuma, and apparently also Brownsville, Texas is, which Brownsville is on the border with Matamoros, Tamaulipas, Mexico. So, you know, it could be very easy for you to apply in Brownsville and then just head on over to Reynosa and finish your process. The only thing with Reynosa is that it's not the safest city, especially after dark. And so, like, I'd rather you go to Tijuana. But if you want to go to Brownsville and then travel over to, you know, Guadalajara or Mexico City or Los Cabos or Puerto Vallarta or wherever else in Mexico, you can do that. And apparently Brownsville, I just heard from somebody today that, you know, they have appointments and they were able to get the process done fairly quickly. So something for you to consider. Depends on the consulate. Lots of first timers. I love it. That's so awesome. Thanks so much for being here. Is it a good practice to purchase a home before the relocation? That's a very personal decision. I mean, I would say it would be a good idea for you to not purchase a home until you have secured your residency. But there are thousands of people who buy homes in Mexico and are only tourists. So you know, it's not a necessity. Like it's not a requirement or prerequisite. You don't have to have a residency visa to be able to purchase property in Mexico. You can be a tourist and purchase property in Mexico. The only reason why we recommend, well, there's a couple of reasons why we recommend getting residency before buying is because, you know, if you're planning on coming to Mexico very often and maybe coming every 6 months or maybe, you know, going every, you know, year, whatever the case might be, you want to be able to travel freely and come in and out as you please. You don't want to have to deal with any immigration officer who might get a little overzealous and want to only give you, you know, instead of your 180 days that you should get as a tourist, they might only give you 30. And so if you have a home and maybe you have pets and maybe you have, you know, things that you need to take care of, it's just better as a resident. The other benefit as a resident is that you are able to take advantage of a huge capital gains exemption when you sell a house in Mexico, but you have to be a resident or a national. And it's, you know, it's a limit on how much you can exempt, but it's pretty substantial. So if you're thinking about selling that property in the future, then it's really, really beneficial for you to have a residency visa and also an RFC. You need an RFC in order for you to take advantage of a capital gains exemption. But yeah, those are my points. I think it is a very personal decision, though, if you're just thinking of buying and holding, or maybe you're not really concerned with a capital gains exemption, or maybe you're thinking about inheriting to a Mexican national, then maybe it's not necessary, right, for you to do it before you actually move. I will say, again, like I mentioned earlier, if you've never lived in Mexico before, I think it's really beneficial for you to rent for 6 months, rent for a year. Go explore different parts of Mexico. Don't get so narrowed down on one city that you think like, I'm a beach person and therefore I will only live on the beach, because you might love actually living in the Central Highlands. But also don't get like, I'm only a city person and I will not ever consider living on the beach, because you might actually love living in Puerto Vallarta or Playa del Carmen or Cancun, or the dozens of gorgeous, amazing beaches that exist in Mexico, like Huatulco, Los Cabos, Barra de Navidad, Manzanillo, Guaymas. There's so many, right? And so just don't get so narrowed down on one specific place, because Mexico is a very big country and the topography is very different in the central part of Mexico than it is on the beaches. There's everything from, desert climate to very, very tropical climate in the south. There's also, mountains in the middle. So there's a little bit of everything depending on where you want to settle. But yeah, I think that's just a personal decision. I hope this has helped you with at least a little bit more of like, okay, this is how I should look at it. So why not just go for permanent straight off? Again, because some people might not have the financial solvency to be able to apply for a permanent residency visa, and because they might not be over 60 and they might not be retired. All the requirements that the consulates need in order for them to grant somebody permanent residency. We've even had customers who are well over 60, well over the savings requirements for a permanent residency visa, and they still get only temporary residency. Why? The consulates don't tell you. They don't tell us. They don't tell them. It's just something that it really is up to them, and the final decision is up to the consul. So you can go for a permanent residency, and then if for whatever reason you get denied, you'll probably get temporary. So when you're filling out your paperwork, just be very intentional about which one you're going to go for. And if you get denied for that one, then just very calmly and collectively just explain to the person that is interviewing you that you would really like to then obtain temporary residency, because you more than meet the requirements for permanent, but given that they're not giving you that, you would like to go ahead and apply for temporary instead. And again, there's really nothing wrong with getting temporary residency. The only inconvenience is that if you're not living in Mexico, you will have to come back and then obviously renew after year one, depending on how you obtained your temporary residency too. If you're married to a Mexican national, so like for example, Dustin, my husband, was able to get his temporary residency through me because I'm a Mexican citizen. And when he got his temporary residency, they gave it to him for 2 years up front. So after 2 years, he can then apply to become a permanent resident. Whereas for most people who are doing it through economic solvency and not through the ties of a Mexican national or another resident, then they would do the same thing. They would get 1 year up front and then they can renew for 3 additional years. So that's why. So let's see. Good evening. I work online and have a small speech language therapy business and would like to provide pediatric speech language therapy services in Mexico. Is it possible? Can one work there? Yeah, you can absolutely work in Mexico. In fact, when you get that is another benefit of a permanent residency versus a temporary residency, if you are able to obtain a permanent, is that work is implied. So you are basically given work permission. A work permit is implied. So meaning you are given permission to work. You do still have to let immigration know like what type of employment you are obtaining, or if you're starting a business, and make those kinds of updates with INM. However, for a temporary resident, you have to apply for a work permit, and you also have to apply. So you have to do two things. You have to apply for an RFC, which is basically your tax ID, and showing the government that you have a fiscal responsibility because you're about to start a business, or because you're going to engage in some other employment in Mexico, or somebody gave you a job. And then you would then get a work permit. And, sometimes INM will tell you, well, you need to get your RFC first. And then sometimes SAT, which is the tax authority in Mexico who issues the RFCs, will tell you, well, you need to get a work permit first. So really an immigration facilitator can help you a lot in this process too, because they know exactly how to talk to those people, and they know how to navigate the system. They've helped a lot of our customers with obtaining work permits. Give me 1 second. The visa type, like I mentioned, you could do either a temporary or permanent. And if you're doing a temporary, then you would need to apply for a work permit. But yeah, you could actually start a business in Mexico if you're starting language therapy services. If you are not servicing any customers in Mexico, so let's say for some of you who might be thinking like, well, I'm a digital nomad, I want to continue working for my company in the United States or Canada or somewhere else in the world, but I want to be able to, like, I can take my laptop and work anywhere, right? And I'm given permission to work remotely. There's a lot of people like that, and that is growing more and more and more. If that is you and you are planning to live in Mexico, you do not need to apply for a work permit as long as your income activity, right, your financial activity does not take place in Mexico. So meaning you are not offering services to Mexicans, you are not selling in Mexico, you are not like basically, generating this income in Mexico. For those of you that are thinking of buying a property and then posting it on Airbnb or some other property management website and renting it out, that is generating an income in Mexico. So you would essentially need to ask for a work permit. If you're not a resident, you would need to become a resident to get a work permit. And then you would also need to pay taxes. And so therefore you would need to have an RFC. If you're offering consulting services, like, there's so many people. I mean, like ever since 2020, or maybe even 2021, 2022 is really when it started. There are so many people teaching others, right, how to move to Mexico, and like offering consulting services and doing like one-on-one calls, or whatever the case might be. So sometimes they meet that person in person, or they take videos of like a rental property and then they sell it to the customer. But all that activity is taking place in Mexico. So those people, if you are one of those people and you're thinking of doing that, then, you need to know that you actually need to become a resident. You need to pay taxes. You need to, register under the right fiscal responsibility in SAT. And you are generating an income in Mexico if that activity takes place in Mexico. Like us, for example, all of our activity, right, all of our customers are in the United States, Canada. Occasionally we get like people in parts of Latin America and other parts of the world, but all of our activity is outside of Mexico. So we don't have any income sources that come from Mexico. And we're not like offering, our online guide in person in Mexico. So just to give you an example of like our business, other people's businesses, and other use cases. If you're a realtor and you're selling properties in Mexico, you absolutely need to then have a work permit. You need to have an RFC. You need to pay taxes in Mexico. That would be generating an income in Mexico. So anyway, yeah, I hope that has given you some good insight into work permits and working. There's more to it. This is just like the tip of the iceberg. Obviously, I'm also not a tax expert. So if you are going to be working in Mexico and are going to be setting up a business, it's very important that you talk to an accountant in Mexico to ensure that your business is set up with the right fiscal responsibility, that you are set up with the right fiscal responsibility, and that you know how to do your tax returns, tu declaración de impuestos. So you would need to talk to an accountant in Mexico to do it the right way. This is a question that we get all the time. Will the RNE or the regularization program exist in 2025? We don't know. We would love to think that it will, but we actually don't know. And we won't know until 2025. So come back in 2025 and watch our live streams and we'll find out together. That's awesome. Thank you, Dawn. Watching from Makihik, she used to recommend a facilitator from the online guide last year for permanent residency. The process was very smooth. That's awesome. For those of you who are wondering, like, how do we help you move to Mexico? We have a complete Mexico relocation guide. If you don't know anything about it, I encourage you to go to our website, mexicorelocationguide.com. I'm going to post it in the comments for you to find out about the guide. And for mexicorelocationguide.com/guide. Our complete Mexico relocation guide is an easy to follow online course that gives you all the important basic information for moving to Mexico the right way. So we go over residency visas, real estate, healthcare, moving your things, moving your pets, taxes, working in Mexico, hiring in Mexico, like what are your obligations as an employer, the public versus the private healthcare system, the regularization program. But we also, like, we know that Mexican bureaucracy is hard to navigate on your own. Even if we give you a lot of really good step-by-step information, there are going to be times where you will need some one-on-one. And for that reason, we also give you a complete directory of contacts across Mexico that includes immigration facilitators, realtors. By the way, these are all people that have been vetted by me. We don't recommend just anybody. We don't take any commissions from any of our recommended contacts. We don't get any kickbacks because it's very important to me that we only recommend people that are reputable, that have a presence, that I know who they are, that our customers are going to have a good experience, in other words, right? It's really important to me that if you buy the guide, you have a good experience with our contacts. But we include private drivers, international moving companies, mail forwarding services. So basically people who give you a mailbox somewhere in the United States. You can order packages and then they'll forward it to you in Mexico. We also give you recommendations for people who can help you nationalize your car. And of course, private relocation tours. So if you're thinking about scouting Mexico and you want a local to show you around and show you what it's truly like to live in that city with no agenda to try to sell you real estate, then that's what our local relocation tour guides are for. But yeah, so thank you so much, Dawn, for sharing your experience. For anybody else who's wondering about the online guide, we are running a flash sale. If you're new around here, you probably don't know, but we don't do sales very often. I mean, it's rare. So for the next couple of hours, it ends tonight at midnight, 11:59 p.m. CST, so Central Standard Time. We are offering you $100 off the complete Mexico relocation guide if you use code MEX, so MEX100 at checkout. And the 100 will take it down to $395 US one time. You get lifetime access. We're constantly updating it. We let you know what updates are in the online guide. And again, it's just like a tool to help you move to Mexico easier. It'll save you hours and hours and hours of research. And you can actually count that the information is accurate, up to date, relevant, unlike a lot of these government websites that unfortunately they just don't get updated. They don't have really clear steps. They're hard to navigate. So we try to make it as simple for you. And, we have thousands of customers all over the place that have used it. And I'm very, very proud to say that we have tons of reviews of customers who have not only used it, but have shared with us, how it's helped them actually move to Mexico easier. So anyway, enough about the promotion. If you're interested in taking advantage of that promotion, again, MEX, so MEX 100 at checkout. That's awesome. Don't let it pass. Thank you, Gary, for that vote of confidence. All right. Do you have any recommendations for areas to move with middle school aged children, single mom with dual citizenship? Thank you, Celia, so much for being here. I love your name. Yeah, I would say bigger cities. Bigger cities are always better. That's my opinion. I mean, honestly, it just depends on your lifestyle. What are your kids into? Do they like to have a lot of activities? Are they going to be like in every social club that you can possibly think of? Are they more indoors and just more reserved and don't really, aren't really outgoing? What's your budget? Like it really depends. It's a kind of like a personal decision. But I will say that usually for people who are thinking of moving to Mexico with kids who maybe don't speak the language and aren't really like used to the culture, and it'll be a shock at the beginning, right? I think the bigger cities have more amenities and bigger opportunities for them to make friends of different backgrounds, and rather than like, and I may be like, partial to this, but rather than like smaller communities where maybe, that set of friends already kind of hangs out with each other and it's harder to break into a smaller group like that. But I also know customers that live in really small, or not really small, but smaller communities like Chapala, like San Miguel de Allende, like Ajijic, just to name a few, right? That these are like smaller towns, not really tiny, but they are smaller. And their kids are loving it there. Like they thrive. They have a bunch of friends. They're enjoying life. And the benefit of that is that it is a small community. So a lot of people just know each other. So it might be easier for you to make friends with other parents that have kids around the same age. Or maybe it's easier for you to find one single school as opposed to like having to shop around for 4 or 5 different schools if you live in a bigger city. So yeah, I think I really do think that for that particular question, it's really important for you to do your research on what kind of school you want your kids to go to. And, because of that, then I would then search for those types of schools and where are they available. The public school system in Mexico is not like the public school system in the United States and Canada. So I might get some like, hate for this, and I don't mean it to come off as like they're not good, but they are not like what you're used to in the United States and Canada. And when I say that, I mean like they don't have the same resources. They don't get, funded left and right by your tax dollars and all these subsidies that the government is throwing at them. So, they have good education, of course, but, the facilities and the grounds might not be like the most up to date. Even though the education might be good, it might be harder for you to find like, a group of friends that will be able to like speak English to your children if they don't speak Spanish. They are more limited than a private school. A private school obviously will have more, and then obviously depending on the private school too, how much resources they have and all those things. But the public schools in Mexico, I will just say, are different than what you're used to in the USA and Canada. And I think for most people who are watching this channel, who maybe you do have some experience with Mexican culture or with just Mexico in general, maybe it's not so shocking to go to a public school. But if you have no experience whatsoever with the Mexican culture and Mexican life in general, I think it would be better for your kids to go to a private school first. And then once you maybe get acclimated, and it also depends where you live, right? What neighborhood you're in and what subsidies the government is giving that school. Not all of them are exactly the same. But yeah, I will just leave it at that. Tom, he says, hey, did my permanent residency in Philadelphia. There were no appointments available, but I just kept clicking until an opening came up. Actually got in on St. Patty's Day back a couple of years ago. Something really important that I want to mention is something that's really important for anybody asking questions on public forums or on public groups or anywhere else where you might ask questions, somebody might have gone through the process a couple of years ago, and whatever process they went through at that time, like even if they did it last year, it's totally different today. And even if they did it 6 months ago, it's probably totally different today, because the consulates are always changing. And sometimes they change one thing, and, you know, like there's a very, very, very commonly known employee at a consulate in McAllen that everybody loves, and her name is Virginia, or Virginia. And Virginia is, you know, everybody says she's a sweetheart, and everybody really likes, you know, talking with her. And they're like, oh, she processed my residency in, like, you know, a matter of hours, and she gave me a smile at the end. She told me, you know, good luck in Mexico. And then we have had other people who, you know, went to that same consulate expecting to maybe talk to Virginia or deal with Virginia, or, you know, this happens in other consulates too. I'm just giving you an example. But, and then Virginia is not there that day, or maybe somebody else is working, or maybe Virginia just isn't having the best day, and maybe she's like asking you for more documents than what she originally told you. So just keep in mind that just because something happened with one applicant, it might not apply exactly to you. Situations can change. The residency visa process is very personal, and your bank statements might not look exactly like somebody else's bank statements. Your demeanor might not be exactly the same as somebody else's. So, you know, sometimes, you know, being super extra nice and smiling and just be very thankful helps. And sometimes if people come in with an attitude, and they come in with this, like, you know, I was told that I would get this, and if I brought in this, might not help. So anyway, I will say just keep that in mind, because, you know, I've seen some Facebook groups where they're like, oh, well, back when I did it in 2019, they only required this and this and this and that. And it's like, yeah, but that was 2019, and it's now 2024. That was 5 years ago. Of course it's going to be different. They used to have appointments all the time online at the various Mexican consulates. And then as the flood of people started moving to Mexico and applying for residency visa, they started pulling back on appointments so readily available. So yeah, of course things are going to change as the flow of people coming to Mexico will change. So yeah, just a tip out there. We have heard of 54-year-olds and 30-year-olds and 40-year-olds get permanent residency. I think that it's not common, but the biggest common denominator that those people had is probably that they had a ton of money saved up in either a savings account or an investment account. If you're interested in knowing what the income requirements are for residency, depending on which consulate you're going to be applying at, I have created a page with a table where I've done this research for you. And again, I still think it's very important that you verify, triple check what the actual income requirements are for the consulate that you're going to be applying at the time that you're going to be applying at, because it can be different. If you're watching this in 2025, most likely those numbers have changed. And we will, of course, update that table when we have new information. We do this research throughout the year. But yeah, we have heard of people getting, you know, permanent residency at under 60 years of age and not retired. And I think what they can prove is that they have more than enough economic solvency to be able to comfortably live in Mexico without any sort of income. For 2024, the permanent residency requirements across the different consulates varies between, for savings. For savings, you have to prove anywhere between $270,000 US, and some consulates are requiring up to $300,000 of a minimum balance for the last 12 months. If you're going based on solvency through employment or income, then you need to have proof of at least, it ranges anywhere from $6,500 a month. Well, actually, McAllen is the lowest one. So McAllen requires around $5,800 a month for the last 6 months. McAllen is in Texas, but McAllen doesn't allow people from out of Texas to apply. So If you don't live in Texas, it's not that easy to apply in McAllen. But there are consulates that require less than the $6,700, $7,000 that a lot of consulates require. So it just depends on which consulate you apply at. And unfortunately, they don't all have the same uniformity. I wish they did. It would make it so much easier on all of you. I know it's frustrating, but it is a good introduction into Mexican bureaucracy. And I think that if you can apply for residency and just take it day by day and not lose your patience and not get frustrated and just accept that it is how it is, you will do okay in Mexico. But if you get really frustrated and you hate the process the entire time through, I'm not saying you won't make it in Mexico, but it'll be a good introduction into what Mexican bureaucracy is like. And Mexican bureaucracy will be a huge part of your initial year in Mexico. I mean, getting a driver's license, renting a home, getting a work permit if you're going to work, applying for, an RFC if you're going to apply for an RFC, setting up utilities if you're going to be setting up utilities, all these different things that you might actually do if you move to Mexico. Some of you might never deal with any of those things, but certainly the residency visa part you will. And I think it's a good introduction into what life in Mexico is going to be. And trust me, it's okay to get frustrated. Just don't let it get so to you that you end up just, throwing your hands in the air and say, Mexico's not for me. Because trust me, it is worth it. It is worth it to go through the process, to move. We have had customers tell us all the time, I wish I would have moved sooner. I wish I would have left whatever country they're leaving. I wish I would have left sooner. I really do. And I wish I would have taken advantage of the residency visa 5 years ago or 4 years ago when I was kind of thinking about it, but I wasn't too sure. So if that's you today, then, just think about what your future self might say. Oh, this is a good question. Thank you for asking this, Erica. For economic solvency, does a minimum required salary count for a married couple, or do you need twice the amount? It depends on the consulate. Some consulates for dependents, they will require about $800 to $1,500 additional every month for financial solvency. Some consulates will require that the dependent be financially solvent on their own so that they meet the minimum requirements. Some consulates have given people dependents residency without ever asking for economic solvency, which is the way it's supposed to be, because if you are, that's after you become a resident. So, just keep that in mind. If you are a Mexican national and you are petitioning your spouse or your children or your sibling or your parents, then that's different, right? As a Mexican national or as a temporary or permanent resident, if you are petitioning family members, if you have a legal document that allows you to live in Mexico, such as a passport or a residency visa, it's different than if you're just coming in as economic solvency. But if this is you and you don't have a way to prove $800, $1,500, double, or the same economic solvency for a spouse or another dependent, don't worry. Mexico is very, very family friendly. So as long as you, the main applicant, can qualify and successfully get your temporary residency card, once you get that residency card, you can petition your family members in Mexico without having to prove economic solvency. There is more paperwork involved if you do it that way than if you just try to do it at the consulate. But given that the consulates are making it really hard for people to add their dependents, right, as their application or to their application, it's worth it to sometimes look into. I would say even it's probably the easiest and least path to resistance, but there is more paperwork involved. You will have to get, if you're married, you will have to get your marriage certificate apostilled, which can only be done in the state where you got married. And you will also need to have it officially translated by again, perito traductor in Mexico, in the state where you're applying. And then, of course, if you have children, you should also get their birth certificates apostilled and translated, as well as, any relation to siblings, parents, things like that. A facilitator can really help you out with that process if you're interested in pursuing that family unity visa in Mexico. So if you're interested in once you've actually applied for yourself and you've been granted that temporary or permanent residency stamp or visa on your passport, and then you need to finish the process in Mexico, once you get your card, you can then make a new appointment and then petition your family. So if you are thinking of going to Mexico just to finish that process, allow yourself at least a couple of days, I would say at least a week. But if you're adding family members, you will need to add more time to that process because you never know if if the perito traductor is not available that week or if maybe other things are needed. Just really allow yourself the time to not stress out about it and get it done. And hopefully it gets done in a couple of days, and the rest of the time that you're wherever you are, you just get to sit back and vacation. Yeah, Tom, if it were a perfect world, you should go for permanent residency first and not apply for temporary residency at all. But unfortunately, the consulates do get to decide. So if they decide that you are getting temporary residency and you're not getting permanent, it is up to them. It's not really up to the applicant. We wish it was, because there's nothing in the Constitution in any immigration law that says that you need to be over 60 and you need to be retired. And all those requirements are requirements that the consulates have recently required. Like in 2019, before the influx of so many foreigners moving to Mexico, they were giving permanent residency to people under 60. They were, as long as they met the economic solvency requirements that permanent residency requires. But that has changed. So just keep in mind, it's not really up to you sometimes. It will be up to the consul at the end of the day. All right, I'm going to take one more question. That's awesome. Somebody got their permanent residency in McAllen with 6 months bank statements at 60 years old. That's great. Congratulations. Let's see. I'm looking to see what else I haven't answered. I've answered a lot of these questions already. Yeah, great question. No, there's no time limit after you purchase a guide to use the services. The facilitators that we have listed in the online guide they charge their own additional fee. So I just want to make that clear. It's not included in the price that you pay to get access to the online course and the directory. But again, they don't charge a lot. It's really not a lot that you have to pay. And that's just for facilitators. Realtors don't charge. I mean, they get paid a commission if they sell you a property, right? If they are renting you a property, usually the landlord is the one that pays them a finder's fee. There are some house hunters that we have in the online guide that don't work as traditional realtors. They do charge the customer a fee to help them find a house. Usually it's like 10% of whatever the rent might be. And the benefit of that is that a lot of realtors in Mexico will only show you the properties that their brokerage or that they run, that they will get paid commission on, right? I mean, it makes sense. Like they're there to make money. But there are many houses that they might not get paid on because maybe that landlord doesn't want to pay a realtor to help them promote their house. They're happy just posting a sign on their window, and whoever walks by or drives by might be able to rent it, or maybe it's through word of mouth. A lot of rentals are done that way in Mexico, through word of mouth, through just finding posters posted on the property that's for rent, or maybe, at different restaurants or different bars, or just by talking to people. They usually tell you, oh, I have a cousin who has a place for rent, or, this person I know is renting their house, and it's a really cute house, and it's a really good price. And usually that's how you find the best prices, is through word of mouth, because a lot of those people are not usually paying somebody to help promote their house. Not always, sometimes they are. But that's how rentals work in Mexico. So sometimes these house hunters are really beneficial, because instead of like only working with like a smaller sphere of whatever that realtor has available to them. It's not like the United States or Canada where we have an MLS and whatever is posted in the MLS is free game to anybody. It's very different in Mexico. There is no MLS. So anyway, that's how the benefit of having a house hunter is that they will find these properties, right? In a lot of cases that somebody might not want to pay them to run or to promote, but they pass on that cost to you. And maybe you're happy paying that cost because it's really a unique property or maybe a really great deal that you wouldn't have found otherwise. And then they also usually help you translate your lease agreement, your rental contract. If you're not in Mexico, they sometimes help you, take photos, take video, do all these things to kind of help you see what you're getting into before you arrive. And maybe if you want to rent it before you arrive, which is not something I recommend all the time. It really depends who you're working with. The realtor has to be really reputable for me to say, like, yeah, it would totally be okay for you to send them a deposit without ever meeting them before and without ever seeing the house. I really recommend that you really see the house in person first before ever giving a deposit. In 99% of the times. There are a few exceptions of realtors that I know are like super reputable. They are 100% trustworthy and honest. And I would say it's totally acceptable to pay them a deposit or send them a deposit so they can hold that house, particularly in towns like Ajijic and Chapala that have like the demand is higher than the market, right? In a lot of the times, especially right now that we're coming up on high season. It's a very seasonal town. Like as soon as it gets cold up north, there's a bunch of people flocking to Ajijic and Chapala and the whole Lake Chapala area. So because of that, usually rentals go really, really quickly. The same thing with San Miguel de Allende in some cases. But yeah, I would say for most of the time, rent before you buy. And there is no time limit on using any information in the online guide or any of the contacts that we have in the online guide. As long as they are still in business, doesn't matter if you buy it today and then you don't plan to actually call them until 2 years from now. We've had many customers that have that situation. All right, so I think that is it. I encourage you guys to please look at the comments section, look at all the resources that I'm sharing. If you're new around here and you're not sure if Mexico's right for you, that's okay. You should start off with first figuring out if you are eligible to move to Mexico, meaning do you qualify for a residency visa before even thinking about buying the guide, before even thinking about starting the residency visa process. It's important for you to know if you actually qualify. And for that, I have a cheat sheet that I want to bring your attention to. It's in the comments section. It'll give you the information that you need to know if Mexico is the right country for you. We also have a ton of blog posts that cover everything from residency visas to how to get citizenship through birthright. So basically through ancestry, like dual citizenship if your parents were born in Mexico, or maybe if you have other ties to Mexican nationals, how to get residency. Again, if you are from one of the countries like the United States, Canada, Japan, most of Europe, Singapore, Panama, the UK, you get up to 180 days if you fly in at most airports. If you drive in, it's not so certain. It just depends on how you're coming in. And again, I will mention this again. Today is the last day to get $100 off the Complete Mexico Relocation Guide. Use code MEX100 at checkout. If you're interested in that, I'm going to add it to the comments. And once it's gone, it's gone. So I really want to reiterate that we don't usually discount the online guide, but I do want to make it available to you guys at a discount, because I know a lot of you after the election results were just like, I really need to figure out where I'm going to go. And even though I think that, political reasons shouldn't be the only reason you move to Mexico, I have to also, let's get real. There's a lot of you that are going to be looking at other countries. And I really think that Mexico is the best option for a lot of people. For starters, the proximity to the United States. The healthcare is top notch for a fraction of the cost of the United States. The cost of living is lower. The weather is good. It's never cold. And, you know, depending on where you're living, it can also be not too hot in the summer, particularly in the highlands. There's many cities that don't ever get above 90 degrees or 85 degrees. Yeah, I put it in the comments, Kathleen. Look at it in like the third comment up. But yeah, there's a lot of benefits to Mexico. And obviously, if you know, we're neighbors, right? So there's a lot of cultural similarities. Like there's Walmart, you know, there's Amazon, so you can get Amazon deliveries. There are other companies that are very recognizable, like for example, DHL, FedEx, you know, HEB. If you're a Texas person, there's HEB in many parts of Mexico. And then, you know, a lot of the infrastructure is very, very familiar and very, very similar. So it's not as shocking as maybe moving to other parts of the world where everything is different. There is still culture shock though, so I don't want to mislead anybody and think like, oh, it's going to be like living in the United States, but you know, with like speaking Spanish. It's not the United States. It is Mexico. It is a different culture. There are different laws. It's a different language. But I think you will enjoy it. And I think that a lot of people always, you know, it's a little bit scary at the beginning to make that move and to make the change, but I will say it's worth it. And I have so many stories to share of people who just email me or write me or post in our private community about just how much they like it and how much they wish they would have come sooner, and that they would have, you know, discovered it sooner, just like made the move sooner. So anyway, if that's you, we're happy to help you. And stay tuned. We're doing another live stream soon. I'm working on bringing on another guest who will help us, you know, talk about real estate and rentals and like the little things that you need to know that a lot of people might not share. So stay tuned for that live stream. I'm also thinking of bringing on a guest to talk to you guys about what it's like for them to live in Puerto Morelos. So I'm working with him to see when will be good. And yeah, stay tuned for all those things. Again, if you're not part of our newsletter, mexicorelocationguide.com/newsletter. That's how you find out about all these events, all the promotions, everything that we ever have to share, we share on there. So thank you so much. And I will see you guys very soon. I hope you guys have a wonderful weekend. Thank you for sharing your evening with me. Hasta luego.